Have you noticed, all of a sudden the US has been getting friendly with China? We saw it on Donald Trump's visit to Beijing.
President Xi's an incredible guy.
We saw it at the Shangri-La Defense Dialogue in Singapore.
I think there is a mutual respect.
And it's not just vibes. It's about the most explosive issue of all, Taiwan, and whether the US would protect it from Chinese attack.
President Xi and I talked a lot about Taiwan. I think the last thing we need right now is a war. That's 9,500 miles away.
In fact, Trump said he discussed US arms sales to Taiwan with Xi Jinping.
It's a very good negotiating chip for us, frankly.
That broke with US commitments going back to Ronald Reagan that it would never talk with China about selling weapons to Taiwan, preventing any chance of Chinese interference. Trump said simply, he doesn't feel bound by that.
What am I going to do? Say I don't want to talk to you about it because I have an agreement that was signed in 1982. No, we discussed arms sales.
Now, Donald Trump questioning old US defense commitments is nothing new. Just ask Europe. Trump has tried to get closer to Vladimir Putin despite his war on Ukraine, and cast huge doubt on America's commitment to NATO. So what does this new tune with China mean for America's allies in Asia? It's not just Taiwan that's at stake. Much of the Indo-Pacific depends on the US to feel safe from Beijing's ambitions, while China's military is exploding in size, from its nukes to its navy.
We've repeatedly raised our concerns directly with China that it is the building up of the Chinese military without the sense of strategic reassurance as to why that is occurring.
Our territorial integrity and sovereignty, particularly in the maritime domain, is increasingly under strain by the expansive actions of China.
It is not possible for Asia to balance China without America at our back.
In the lobbies and lounges of the Shangri-La Dialogue, Chinese delegates spoke of a historic shift in power.
So this is the first time that the United States has recognized the strength of China as a peer power.
At the same time, there are fears of US overstretch, with Trump's war against Iran having used huge amounts of resources. The Pentagon moved equipment and personnel from Asia to the Gulf, and there's talk of significant cutbacks in Europe. Not to mention a national security strategy that puts the Western Hemisphere first. That strategy also says Asia is meant to remain a top priority for Trump. But with all this going on, is he really still committed? So in this video, we'll dig into Trump's words and his official strategy, and what's actually happening in reality. And we'll see how Asia is preparing for whatever comes next. There's no better place to go to examine this than the Shangri-La Dialogue, where Asia meets to discuss the power struggle for this continent's future.
Throughout the history of the Shangri-La Dialogue, and US-China strategic competition has been the core agenda for long years. But this year seems to be, the tone was quite different.
For sure, the change in tone has been like night and day. Here's Pete Hegseth at Shangri-La in 2025.
Communist China. Communist China. Communist China. Communist China.
And here he is in 2026.
Our focus is strong, quiet, and clear. Quiet, 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 quiet.
But there was a difference in specifics too. In 2025, Hegseth's speech mentioned Taiwan a lot.
Taiwan, 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 Taiwan.
No mention of Taiwan at all in 2026. The furthest Hegseth went was this.
As the national security strategy and the national defense strategy direct, our approach in the Pacific centers on deterrence by denial along the first island chain.
Okay, let's dig into that. First, a couple of definitions. The first island chain is the series of islands skirting around the edge of China, including the Philippines in the south and Japan in the north. Taiwan is right in the middle. So, some reassurance for Taiwan there, what many took to be an implicit mention by Hegseth. What about the other part of what he said?
Deterrence by denial.
What is deterrence by denial? Well, it comes up in the strategies that Hegseth mentioned. The National Defense Strategy comes from his own team at the Pentagon, and it offers a definition. We will make clear that any attempt at aggression against US interests will fail and is therefore not worth attempting in the first place. That is the essence of deterrence by denial. And it adds, we will build, posture and sustain a strong denial defense along the First Island chain. As we just saw, Taiwan is a central link in the First Island chain. So does that mean that Taiwan is safe? Well, it turns out it's not quite so clear. Time to introduce a new character to this story. Meet Elbridge Colby. He's the top policy guy in the Pentagon, and he's the mastermind of the National Defense Strategy. He even wrote a book about all this, Strategy of Denial. That was before he joined the administration. He's also a man with supporters in high places. Vice President J.D. Vance came to vouch for him in his confirmation hearing. Colby faced questions from senators about exactly this question over Taiwan. In his view, is defending it essential, even existential to the US, or is it something less than that?
I've always said that Taiwan is very important to the United States, but as you said, it's not an existential interest. It's very important. The core American interest is in denying China regional hegemony.
So Taiwan is very important, but perhaps not more than that. The overarching goal is preventing China from dominating Asia. Colby's boss, Pete Hegseth, framed the US view like this in his Shangri-La speech.
The Pacific dominated by any hegemon would unravel the regional balance of power and undermine the equilibrium we all seek to preserve.
Some remarked that this in itself was a major shift for the US. After being accustomed to supremacy in the region for so long, it's now aiming at best for a balance of power with China.
I am really curious to see why the United States has voluntarily given up the goal of maintaining its supremacy in the region. That's what China wanted for a long time, and I think that the United States is giving it to China.
The National Defense Strategy talks about this. It says, by any measure, China is already the second most powerful country in the world. The fact is that its power is growing, and it declares the objective to maintain a favorable balance of military power in the Indo-Pacific. China has also proven its economic power. In 2025, it showed that it can use its dominance over rare earth supplies to strangle essential industries in the West. Meaning that beneath the smiles, Xi Jinping has proven leverage over Trump that the US hadn't experienced before. So let's bring this back to Taiwan. And that question of whether it can count on the US. Let's hear another quote from Trump's interview after his summit with Xi Jinping, when he referred to Taiwan's current president, Lai Ching-te.
They have somebody there now that wants to go independent. Well, it's a risky thing when you go independent. You know, they're going independent because they want to get into a war and they figure they have the United States behind them.
This was doubly concerning for the Taiwanese, with Trump adopting the Chinese narrative that a war would be Taiwan's own fault, and giving little impression that he felt the island was worth defending.
I think that this significantly undermines the U.S.'s deterrent capabilities, because deterrence at the end of the day is about perception.
This all carried echoes of Trump blaming Ukraine for Russia's aggression.
You're gambling with World War III.
Trump's attitude to Taiwan was a dramatic shift from Joe Biden, who stretched the US's traditional strategic ambiguity on whether it would defend the island to the opposite extreme.
Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
You are?
That's the commitment we made.
Trump's comments appeared to be a complete reversal from that. Back in Taiwan, the government rushed to downplay what Trump said. A Taiwanese delegate at Shangri-La, who's close to the government, also responded stoically.
A lot of speculation, really, that is up in the air. But for Taiwan, what we need to do is actually to communicate with the United States more, and also to doubling about our commitment on our part regarding the defense, as well as our actions to strengthen the deterrence against Chinese possible attack against Taiwan.
But political divisions in Taiwan have blunted its ability to boost its own defense spending. leaving serious question marks about the future. Taiwan's public appears to be feeling the strain. A poll after the Trump-Xi summit showed only 29% of respondents believed that Taiwan's interests would be properly taken care of. The concerns go across the region. If Taiwan is perceived as potentially expendable for the US, what does that mean for everyone else? If the central link in the first island chain weakens, could the whole chain disintegrate?
I think the implications of that is that Xi Jinping believes that the United States may not intervene and come to Taiwan's aid. And if that's the case, then countries in the region, Japan, the Philippines, Australia, and South Korea, will probably not have any incentives to counter China because they cannot counter China without the US's strong capability and will to do so.
So at Shangri-La, people talked about how to prevent all that happening. What do America's allies and partners need to do to keep it committed? Pete Hegseth offered an answer in his speech. He said with the US now aiming for a $1.5 trillion defense budget, others here needed to step up too.
This is not a burden America can or should carry alone. A favorable balance of power requires capable allies with real military strength, real industrial capacity, and real political resolve. For too long, the security of this region has rested disproportionately on American military power, while many of our allies and partners allowed their own defense capabilities to atrophy.
It was much like Hegseth's message to European allies during his first months in office.
Our message is going to continue to be clear. It's deterrence and peace through strength, but it can't be reliance. It cannot and will not be reliance on America.
Part of that is about raw cash. NATO members agreed to hike defense spending as far as 5% of GDP. Among US Asian allies, Japanese defense budgets are now a central focus.
We've been surrounded by increasingly severe security environment. The rise of China as a military power, North Korea seems to be fully determined to become a nuclear state, and Far Eastern Russia. But at the time that the United States is increasingly demanding allies to do their own jobs. And I think under these circumstances, we are reviewing national security defense strategy by end of this year. And I think we are ramping up our own capability commitments and also defense expenditure targets.
China has criticized Japan over its plans, particularly Tokyo's expressions of concern over the threat to Taiwan. Beijing has even accused Japan of a return to the militarism of the Second World War. At Shangri-La, Japan's defense minister dismissed that as ridiculous.
Some of you may have heard the term new militarism, but nothing further from the truth. Think about it. There is a country that has a huge arsenal of nuclear weapons and strategic bombers. Japan has neither of such weapons, and yet Japan is labeled new militarism. Isn't it strange?
Japan isn't just focused on its own capabilities. It's also emerging as a key point in multiple webs of defense cooperation across the region. With no multilateral alliance like NATO as a defense bedrock, what's developing in Asia is something different.
Japan's been reaching out to Australia, to the Philippines, India, New Zealand, others as well, to try to get them all to contribute to maintaining the international rules-based order, which, of course, if you're a maritime state, in particular, like Japan is, you depend on open sea lanes of communication and so on. So this is existential for Japan.
For Japan's leaders, this is a way of sending messages to both China and the US.
So the more networks that Japan can build in this region, I think the better it is positioned, if you like, to create this strategic complexity for China, which then should ideally act as a deterrence against anything happen that threatens the stability of the region. It also, of course, is a way of Japan showing agency to the US in terms of its ability to contribute to the stability of the region.
I think end of the day, we definitely want to induce the United States as a responsible player in this field. It is very hard for regional collaboration without the United States can offset and balance those integrated capability of China by itself. So I think it's very important. Those regional cooperation is the pretext of inducing United States' responsible role in this region.
Another US ally, the Philippines, is also a central player. Its defense minister speaks of a convergence endeavor reaching well beyond Asia.
The United States is one of those that, are with us, but Japan's with us, Australia's with us, New Zealand's with us, Canada's with us, France is with us, and a lot of more convergence partners.
The Philippines has directly experienced China's challenge, with Chinese Coast Guard vessels repeatedly confronting their fishing fleet in the South China Sea. The Philippines defense minister has a blunt message for Beijing.
First and foremost, get out of Philippine territory.
But Gilberto Teodoro says he cannot meet the spending targets that the US has set, despite a significant boost to his budget.
For an archipelago of 7,600 islands where you still have to invest in your basic infrastructure for connectivity, education, healthcare, it is very difficult to hit the 3.5% of GDP.
Will Pete Hegseth be satisfied by that? For now, he seems to be giving the Philippines a pass. He held up the recent US-Philippines exercises, the largest ever, and praised the spending hikes that Manila has managed so far. His message: the US wants model allies.
We will prioritize working with model allies, those nations who are most capable, clear-eyed, and ready to defend their national interests.
Hegseth singled out South Korea for special mention.
If you want to see what burden sharing looks like, consider the Republic of Korea. South Korea has invested consistently in its own defense, not because it does not have the luxury of treating war like an academic exercise. They live on the front lines, and so they build real combat power.
In fact, the US clearly needs South Korea. Its shipbuilding prowess could be the only way for the Americans to narrow a critical manufacturing gap with China. But for Seoul, being called a model ally isn't necessarily as reassuring as it might sound.
The reason why Hegseth called South Korea as a model ally is because South Korea is willing to take primary responsibility to defend itself. And that doesn't mean that the United States has a stronger will to defend South Korea. Actually, because the United States doesn't want to get involved in potential contingencies on the Korean Peninsula.
South Korea lives under constant nuclear threat from its northern neighbor, relying on its alliance with the US for the nuclear umbrella known as extended deterrence. But polling suggests the South Korean people are losing confidence that America would really stand by it in a nuclear confrontation, and thinking they may need to develop a deterrent of their own.
If you look at public opinion polls, of course, support for nuclear weapons in South Korea has been pretty high for a while. But after President Trump came back, it really skyrocketed to almost 80%. It was about like 70%, but now it is about 80%. And then if you talk to South Korean security experts, they have very serious concerns about credibility of U.S. extended deterrence.
Japan is also covered by American extended deterrence. Does it have similar fears? The legacy of the US attacks of 1945 means the taboo of developing homegrown nuclear weapons is deeper there. The US has tried to reassure Japan in a recent dialogue, including an apparent reference to a new nuclear missile that it's developing.
I think that we are weighing a lot of trust on the United States coverage of the extended deterrence towards Japan, and you cannot really have a one-fits-all approach because China has its own dynamics on the nuclear weapons, and so has North Korea, who adopted the new nuclear doctrine. In that scale, that underwater assets and the maritime assets of the precise strike weapons like cruise missiles, nuclear equipped, is I think at what Japan and Korea wish who is eager to have that capability provided by the United States.
So allies still want the US to stay committed to Asia, especially on the nuclear front. And they want reassurance that as long as they step up, the US will keep delivering. But what about Taiwan? Not a US ally, but the dependent partner here with most immediately at stake.
The next critical test is looming. Will Trump go ahead with the next Taiwan arms sale, which he's said is currently in abeyance? It would be the biggest ever.
It would certainly fit the strategy of deterrence by denial, helping make Taiwan too well defended for China to risk attacking. And it would be in line with the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, which is enshrined in US law and has wide support in Congress. In the decades since that act passed, every US president has approved arms sales to Taiwan, running into the tens of billions of dollars overall. The biggest so far was under Donald Trump, just back in December 2025. The Taiwanese hope that Trump the businessman will keep the deals going.
史上对台湾军售最多的总统就是川普总统，那他也认为军售应该是一门好生意啊，这对美国也是很有帮助对我们来讲，对不对？我们也需要。
At Shangri-La, some analysts cautioned against overinterpreting any delay.
The way that I would view it is air gapping really difficult issues for a little while after something as positive as a leader summit between the two countries at the highest level, and just giving a little bit of space and perhaps face to the Chinese side. But ultimately, we'll see whether the arms deal goes forward.
For their part, the Chinese hope that the recent summit might have changed American calculations. Trump signed up to Xi Jinping's framing for the US-China relationship, one that they hope will make him see and do things differently.
President Xi and President Trump agreed on a new vision for China-US relations, that is constructive strategic stability. Now, the most important thing for both sides to do is to work together to translate that vision into realities in all aspects.
That was the language agreed to by both sides, a constructive relationship of strategic stability. Beijing says an arms sale to Taiwan would break that.
We are against such arms sales any time of any amount. That's quite clear. Clearly, any further arms sales is not constructive. It will hurt stability.
So did Trump have this in mind when he questioned that Reagan-era commitment to never discuss Taiwan arms sales with China? One of what are called the 6 assurances. A delegate close to Taiwan's government did acknowledge that is a concern.
Yes, President Trump, he did say that the 6 assurances, that was a long time ago, that probably indicate that he thinks that probably we should change some of those. That is something that if that indicates the very fundamental U.S. Policy change on Taiwan, then the Taiwan-U.S. communication as well as the consultation about the possible, what would be the new policy framework that needs to be established. That's something that we really need to do.
The fear for Taiwan that weapons truly do become a negotiating chip for Trump as he chases deals on trade with Xi Jinping. That even if arms sales do continue, they become subordinate to US economic interests.
I would not think that the United States will give up the policy of the arms export to Taiwan as a basic core tenet of the Taiwan Relations Act. But in terms of the operationalizing, how to make those constructive relationship of the strategic stability, they may be the case that the President Trump will delay the decision until that the actual much more bigger comprehensive deal could be materialized between two sides.
It would be another case of Trump taking an unconventional approach to diplomacy and deal-making. He's already scrambled European security, and that story isn't over yet. In Asia, another story might just be beginning. Will we look back on this year's warming of relations between Trump and Xi as a turning point, or just as a tactical shift as the US adjusts to a more powerful China?
strategic competition is still very much present. And so the question is, what does that look like moving forward? How much progress can actually be made between these two countries?
As Shangri-La delegates tried to think through what the future holds, a veteran diplomat from the hosts, Singapore, reflected like this.
Who is in the White House, whether you consider that person reliable, unreliable, nice, nasty, you like him or you hate him, you got to work with, there's only one America and we have to work with it.